While Western attention is focused on the Ukraine, other malignant states are plotting to act. China is expanding its belligerence in the Western Pacific. North Korea is threatening its neighbors in America, and Iran is on the brink of acquiring a nuclear weapon. What is behind Iran's irrational irascibility, and what does it portend Israel? Stay tuned. Well, Tim, I think the question that seems to be on most people's mind
is, what is irascibility?
Yeah, you can go to dictionary.com and look that one up.
No, that just means they're contentious and trying to foment evil wherever they turn, yes.
And that's the question, because I think the world's tension right now is focused on the Ukraine. COVID's kind of wearing out, so there's still some of that. But in the meanwhile, Iran is still doing its thing behind the scenes, and the world's focus is off them. What is Iran trying to accomplish by starting a war in the Middle East, particularly in annihilating Israel?
Well, Iran has always had, since its revolution back in the late 70s, famously when it took so many Americans hostage. There were Americans from the embassy that were held hostage for 444 days at the tail end of the Carter administration, released on the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated, because he made clear he would not tolerate that kind of behavior. But ever since, Iran has considered the United States to be the great Satan. And of course, they hate Israel, but Israel, being a small country, is the little Satan. So Iran has always had a hatred for all things Western, all things democratic, all things Christian, or in this case, Jewish. And so there is an irrationality to Iran's behavior that's been evident for the last 40 years plus.
And it's interesting to see that the Iranians are, at least the leadership of them, not the country, but the leadership, of course, they're all Shiites, Ayatollahs. They're very devout in belief in their eschatological system is what's really driving what they're doing. So when people say, religion doesn't matter, no, a lot of these nations are being driven by a religious mindset. Even the humanist nations, like, say, North Korea, still worship Kim Jong-un. But they believe in Iran that if they can start a war in the Middle East, then the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, will return and set up Islam to be a global caliphate and rule over the entire world. So Iran believes is what they're doing is good in their eyes, to try to start a war with Israel, try to destroy the Jewish people, because there's many verses in the Quran that talk about the destruction of the Jewish people. So it's religiously motivated. And it's weird how, as a secularized West looks at Iran and thinks, it's jobs, it's global warming, it's all this crazy stuff. No, it's a religious eschatological motivation.
It sure is. And as Dr. Al Mohler would say, everything boils down to theology, and we are unwise not to consider the theological implications. Quite frankly, many of our leaders have dismissed theology as a motivation for even some of our foes, and that is to their discredit, and really it is an undermining of true understanding, because you're exactly right. Eschatology plays a huge role in Iran's mindset. And frankly, their former president, Ahmadinejad, who seemed very irrational to us, was following through on his belief system theologically. And so he didn't even care if his own nation got incinerated, as long as he fomented chaos, because he believed that out of that chaos, out of that potential conflict, the 12th Mahdi, that Shiite final ruler, their messianic figure, would emerge to bring Islam over the entire world. So he was willing to take his nation into war, or to do things that would devastate his own nation, because it played into his eschatology. Israel recognizes that Iran possessing a nuclear weapon would be an existential threat to them. Sadly, right now, the world is distracted. Now, it's not just because of Ukraine. We were distracted prior to that with COVID. Our own nation is distracted with all the economic woes that are being inflicted by our current administration, whether it's inflation, whether it's devaluing of our currency. We are in dire straits economically, more so than most people realize. But the point is that under our current leadership, there's no focus on Iran, except trying to do whatever we can to recreate some kind of a treaty with them And the Iranians don't care whatsoever about engaging in a treaty or honoring a treaty. So it's a fool's errand.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Obama years when they made the Iranian nuclear deal. First, they tried sanctions. We're going to keep the money from them, and that will make them not want to build a nuclear weapon. It didn't, of course, because, again, it's religiously motivated. And then they turned around and said, all right, well, we're going to give you money. And they're sneaking shipments of gold bullion in the middle of the night. And now that Biden's in, he's basically resurrecting Obama's plan, and okay, let's give them more money again. Give them more money to stop them from building a nuclear weapon. You can't buy these people off. So when you have a people group who say that they are building a nuclear weapon to wipe Israel off the map, that shows you how much they care about the Palestinians are supposedly fighting, because they'll all die too. But they are motivated to destroy Israel. So prophetically then, Tim, will Israel be destroyed by Iran?
No, we know that Israel will not be destroyed, but we also know prophetically and by a promise of God that those who do not support Israel, those who do not bless Israel, will themselves be judged. So God did raise up nations to punish Israel at times in the past. The Chaldeans, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, they are all on the ash heap of history. He has used other nations to judge or to discipline his people at times. But the Iranians will be judged, and those nations who do not bless and support Israel will also be judged. And so the United States, as we have indicated before, has been a very fickle ally of Israel. They considered it a great blessing when the former administration moved, Mr. Trump, our embassy to Jerusalem, and was very supportive of Israel. But right now they feel like they have been cast aside once again, because under Joe Biden, Israel is an afterthought and is being pushed to do things that they don't want to do. So at some point, it is likely that Israel will act unilaterally to defend itself against Iran.
You know, when you talk about supporting Israel, the Bible gives a promise that those who bless Israel will be blessed and those who curse Israel will be cursed. We read about the destruction of Iran in Bible prophecy in Ezekiel 38 and 39, that Russia will lead a coalition of Islamic nations, including Iran, to try to go and destroy Israel and plunder her. God steps in to human history, and he destroys them with earthquakes and natural disasters, with hail, the armies turning on each other. And then it says in this prophecy that God will then destroy, send fire on those nations, attack Israel. So we know that Iran's just satanic hatred, and it's got to be satanic hatred of Israel, will be met by God directly, where he will destroy those nations because of it. So Iran is, and I feel for the people, because I think the people are being dragged by their religiously motivated government into their own destruction.
They certainly have been dragged. I will say this to our credit, and this is, I give a shout out to former President Harry Truman. The United States was the first to recognize Israel in 1948. I think blessing fell upon this nation in the years following that, because we were supportive of Israel. When we have supported Israel, we've been blessed. When we have, again, pushed Israel to the side, the blessing has been removed, and boy, is it being removed now. But there is blessing being poured out on Iran in this regard.
Yes.
Iran has one of the fastest growing churches. It's an underground church. But Jesus Christ is appearing to Iranians, men, women, and children, in visions, and they are putting their faith in Jesus Christ, the Jewish Messiah, our Messiah. And so that is worthy of great celebration, because we do have brothers and sisters in Iran today, and our prayers are with them as well.
We want all people to be saved just as Jesus Christ does. And that doesn't matter. There's not good countries or bad countries. There's good and bad leaders. There's good and bad ideologies. And so we know that one day that Jesus Christ will have a remnant come out of Iran, a remnant to come out of Israel, come out of the United States,
yes,
that knows him and follows him when he sets up his kingdom on this earth. So pray for that. We are citizens all together of that millennial kingdom.